Wow, this is, you're probably feeling potentially a little bit, yes, like a roller coaster hits you, you know? Yeah. Yeah. Which, it's kind of very sadly what we want to do. That's kind of the idea. I mean, I don't do academic philosophy or anything. Well, I do. I teach in universities occasionally, but my main interest is shaking myself up and being part of communities where we sometimes look at the difficult things in our lives. And I want this to be not just an experience of talking about some difficult things, but experiencing it. And by the way, that doesn't mean we're doing it right at all, but at least I'm feeling something. Oh my goodness. Ali's about to kill himself back there. He keeps saying to me, resurrection, resurrection. But the secret of all this, and you don't have to agree with this, and I think I don't even know if I do sometimes and I've committed my life to this process, really committed everything to this process. But it's the idea that actually, strangely, this experience of the laying down, the loss of life, is also paradoxically a place of hopefully coming and finding a new depth of life. So whenever you read in the Bible about life and death, these terms are very rarely about biological life and death. They're generally about existential life and death. So whenever Jesus says, "I've come to bring life and life in all its fullness," of course, this is not him speaking to the dead. He's not in a graveyard talking to people who are literally dead. He's talking to people who are alive, but experiencing life as a form of death, right? And when he says, "Let the dead bury the dead," the first use of the word dead is an existential use. Again, it's like people who are living in a form of death. Let them bury the dead. So this is a problem with, these new technologies that say that one day soon we might be able to pretty much abolish death, right? If that is true, the issue is, of course, that it's not possible. Not that it's not possible to get a technology where we effectively banish the end of biological life. That is possible. It might be something we're able to achieve. And if not live forever, maybe for thousands or millions of years. I don't know. But the point is that there's a form of death which doesn't come at the end of life, but there's a form of death that infuses life, right? And that this is actually what religion and what a lot of philosophy is about. It's about this form of life, this form of death that is within life. So if I had a gift where I could touch you in the forehead and you would live forever, right? I could just touch you, walk around touching you, live forever, but you couldn't enjoy the depth of your life. I wouldn't be a god, I'd be a devil, right? Heaven would be millions of people screaming for the end. There is something about what we're looking for, as Catherine mentioned, this intensity of life, a depth dimension to life. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't or can't continue on forever, but if there is not something about us being able to enter into a deeper intensity of life, then longevity is that's not going to be of much value to us. Life in all its fullness is a form of longevity, and something that I'm not really looking at in any depth here, but I want to mention it in relation to this question because I think it's coming up. Is why are we concentrating so much on this? Is that often when we are pursuing something that we think will make us whole and complete, we pursue it and it causes all manner of problems. So the first problem is, we don't get it. So say it's $1 million or $2 million or whatever that you think, if you could get that, then everything would be great. You either don't get it and life is difficult. I didn't get what I thought would make me happy. I didn't get to go out with that person. I didn't get the job or whatever I wanted. So either you don't get it and that life is depressing, or you do get it. And you realize that even if it improves your life in some way, it doesn't give you what you want. I experienced very viscerally when I went to America, I met some people who have the American dream, who have, in a sense, succeeded financially and materially. And, there's some great things about that. They have great showers. Their houses are always a lovely temperature. Yeah, honestly, and really comfy beds. These are things that I really like. I like these things, right? But are they still as immersed in the existential anxieties of life as everybody else? Absolutely, and sometimes, more so in some ways and less so in others. when I lived in that area, because I was lent a guest house in an area that was incredibly wealthy, I was the most unhappy I've ever been. And when I went home to Belfast and was sleeping on a couch in my friend's spare room, I was so happy because I had community, I had friends, and all of that kind of stuff. So the idea is, you're pursuing something that you think will make you whole and complete. You don't get it, it destroys you. But even worse than that is that we tend to fantasize that other people have it. Whenever we are caught up in this fantasy, it's like, I don't have it, and they do. Immigrants, they're stealing from us, they're taking our jobs, or they're taking our welfare, which are mutually exclusive terms, but they're taking something from us, And like in films, in Hollywood films, it's not the good guys who are happy. If you watch it, it's the bad people are happy. The baddies, they're having an excessive pleasure, and we hate it. The Joker literally has a smile etched on his face, right? He is having excessive pleasure. Batman is the one who's unhappy and lost somebody, and so the Batman, it takes from the Joker this excessive pleasure. That's why there's that Romanian parable that says of a farmer who's working the fields, and God comes down and says, I'll give you anything you want. You're a good and faithful man. And he's about to speak, and he says, even better than that, whatever I give you, I'm going to give your neighbor double. It's a good day, a day of generosity. So the farmer says, take one of my eyes, right? That sometimes we so hate the other. So, if we're single and we're lonely and we realize a friend of ours is really happy and getting married, and we're like, oh, I'm so happy for you, when everything inside you wants to tear it apart, and it's not because you're evil or you're bad, but in some way there's something you're seeing. If they've got the thing that if only I had, I'd be happy, and it causes this destruction. And the third way it works as well is sometimes we pretend we're happy to evoke the pleasure or to evoke the jealousy of other people. That phrase, success is the best form of revenge. Because success makes it look like you're happy and everything's good, and then that will evoke something in the people who you don't like. So if parents in America write these letters about how great their kids are every Christmas and send them out with pictures, and little Johnny is going to, straight A's and is going to into politics and might become the president, and little Johnny is a heroin addict living out of a burnt out car, right? It doesn't matter. The illusion of we have the perfect family or we have the perfect relationship, even if the relationship's terrible, gives a certain substitutory pleasure. And this is what's interesting, is most animals are utilitarian. They just do what gives them pleasure, and they avoid what doesn't give them pleasure. Human beings are very strange in that way. Human beings often pursue things that actually damage them. That if they were more selfish, they would stop. Once you've earned $20 million, why not just stop and enjoy it? Why are you trying to earn another 20, another 40? And some people will say, and I know I don't want to be doing this. It's ruining my health. It's ruining my family relationships, but I'm pursuing this, or I'm pursuing fame to this. I don't know. Why can't I stop? Or I keep going out with people who are bad for me. Why do I do that? And so we get into this strange thing where we have what Freud called a death drive, a drive that actually causes us to act against ourselves and causes life to be difficult. And part of what we're trying to do here in different ways, and my wording for it is this: to stop. That in the Lacanian frame, it's the idea is this: is that instead of being free to pursue what we desire, there's also a freedom from the pursuit of what we desire. And in our society, everybody, everywhere you turn, people are selling you something that you desire. Have this, purchase this, own this product, do this everywhere. It's like a world's huge vending machine with products that are promising so much, in the church as well, all promising so much. And that's the freedom we have to pursue our greatest pleasures. But for me, the church in its most radical form, and which is its most traditional form in some respects, when you go to a little local parish church, and you kind of sense that there might be here a freedom from the pursuit of pleasure, in a sense of that frenetic drive that can destroy us, and actually beginning to learn to live. there's a Buddhist story of a woman who has a child, a little baby girl, and the little baby girl dies after only a few days. She was weak and she died. And the woman wraps the child's body in linen and wraps the body to her own. And she goes in search of someone, of course, who'll resuscitate her child. She goes to faith doctors and witch healers and the village elders, and nobody can help. But one of the elders says, well, high up in the mountains, away from everybody, it said there's a holy man who is so close to the divine he can even raise the dead. Might be a myth, he might be long since dead, but they say he lives by a river in a humble dwelling, so go in search of him. And she does. She packs a few provisions, she goes up into the mountains, and after a day or two, she finds a little hut beside a river, and she knocks on the door. Well, this old man comes out, and she begins to weep. And she says, I don't know if you're the one I'm looking for. I don't know if you're the one they talk about down in the village. But my child is dead, and I must have her back. Well, the old man takes pity on her and says, I'm the one you're looking for, and I can help you. But to help you, I need to create a potion. And the potion requires ingredients. And one of the ingredients is a handful of mustard seeds taken from a home that has not been burned by that black sun of suffering that has seared your life. So go back and find the mustard seeds, then return to this dwelling. She goes back down into the village, and she goes from home to home. But she can't find one house that hasn't been touched by death and suffering and mourning. And yet, as she listens to the stories of other people's sufferings, and as she is able to speak of her own, she is finally able to come to terms with the death and bury her little girl in the earth. Now, what you see in that story, I think, is key. The old man doesn't say to her, I can't bring back your child. Doesn't say that. But he also doesn't say he can. He says, I can help. So kind of enigmatic. He holds her in her suffering. In the same way, if you're a pastor in a hospital and someone is dying and they're saying, will I be all right? Will I be all right? I would say it's generally, not always, but I say it's generally not good to be going, yes, everything will be fine, right? Often we only do that because we are too frightened of the other person's death. We encounter our own, so we're saying to the other person, you'll be fine, because we haven't really come to terms with being able to contain that in ourselves. But anyway, you don't say, everything will be fine, everything will be good. But neither do you say, no, it's all going to be awful. You put your hand on their shoulder and you say, I'm here for you. I'm here. This must be so difficult, but you use your flesh to touch theirs and say, I'm right beside you. So that's enigmatic. You're helping to contain where they are. And then this old wise man creates a space where she is able to listen to other people's stories and able to share her own, right? And in that space where she's not directly thinking that that's going to be healing, no, she still wants her child back. Of course she does. She doesn't want to go down and come to terms with this. Of course she doesn't. She wants her kid back. But a space is created subtly where that can begin to happen. And over time, in this situation, healing occurs. And that doesn't always happen. But in the story, this healing occurs and she's able to bury her child in the ground. You go like, oh my goodness, right? It's not really great news. This is not like come to the front and everything's going to be fantastic. Come to the front and the child will be raised. It's like, okay, right, that's a message I want to come to the front. In fact, I did come to the front of a church with that message once, many years ago when I was 17. This message is like, it's not going to get the private jet for me, as I say, It's like, come to the front, embrace the difficulties of life, that you're not going to get what you want. That's good news. You're not going to come to the front for that. And that's why, you don't, that's not the altar call. Life's a bit crap and you don't have the answers. Come to the front. Like, oh, that's brilliant. Me. You're not going to do that. You do it very indirectly. People come and strangely they say, is it going to be all right? And, liturgically or whatever, you're basically saying, I'm with you. We're here together. And gradually you provide a context, liturgical context and a space where they're able to begin to do the process and do the work and be healthier. And I think, communities and churches do that. So this is the model, and that's why it's kind of good news. And Freud did say once when he said, like, oh, well, what's the point of psychoanalysis? And he says, well, I want to take misery and make it into everyday unhappiness. Oh, okay, I'm going to pay a lot of money for that. And you go like, that sounds awful. But actually, it's the misery that's the real problem, which is the death drive, the misery of being caught up in self-destructive violence, politically, economically, in various ways. It's violence, this eruption of violence that is utterly destructive. And actually, everyday unhappiness is part of life, just as everyday happiness is and joy is. And being able to take all of that on is actually good news. It's good news. And that's why I've committed myself to it, because for many years of my life, I was promising the God who would fix everything. And I saw a lot of damaged people as a result of that. And now, I don't know, but I'm trying to find a way of going, the God in the midst, the weak God, the God in the lives and the relationships that we share with each other. There's an old story about a guy, I can't forget his name. What was his name? I'll go with Seamus. He's on a desert island, and someday I'm going to write a book about Seamus. Seamus is my spiritual guide. He is my power animal, right? And Seamus is on a desert island on his own, and he's been there for 20 years, nobody else on the island. And eventually someone rescues him. And this plane sees some buildings, lands, and finds this guy. He's like, there. Oh my goodness, 20 years you've been on this island. Yeah. Wow, how did you live? I said, well, I'll show you. So he shows them this lovely house that he built. He said, I built that a couple of years after I landed on the island. Oh, very good. And then they're about to walk away, and he goes, well, what's the building beside it? I go, oh, he says, I'm a very religious man. He says, very religious man. That's my church. I go there every Sunday. Every Wednesday night, I read my Bible there. Right? So, very good. I said, oh, and see, there's a building beside it. What's that? He said, oh, I don't want to talk about it. What? No, I don't want to talk about it. Forget it. Let's go. Come on, tell me. Oh, he says, that's a church I used to go to. Terrible place, right? Now, that's the thing. Seamus was not able to bring in his own symptom, his darkness, look at it, so he projects it onto something else. That's the problem. That's the difficulty. They're the issue, right? Not me. Now, by the way, sometimes we have an issue with someone who really is an idiot, right? This is not about getting rid of idiots. It's not that every time you have a problem with someone, you have a problem with yourself. No, people are idiots, right? But it's about demonizing people, making people two-dimensional. Like that's all they are, is an idiot. That's all they are is difficult. What we do often is we say, oh, that church, that was bad. The place I used to go to, they're all dumb. And by the way, we're all like Seamus. Usually we're attacking the very things we believed 5 years earlier, right? And we go, how can anybody believe that? You believed it 10 years ago, right? But now we want to pull the ladder up behind us and say, look, I don't know, well, look at all those crazy evangelicals or whatever. They're mental. Going like, yeah, 5-10 years ago, I was like looking at SCM and PCN and look at all those liberals just sitting around. The only sin is not choosing the right dessert wine, It's like, good grief. No way. I want to fight for something. I want to be, yeah, whatever. So you go like, they're the bad ones. You create the two-dimensional badness. And go, now we want to create a community that has light, a community that's right. And the big thing is, of course, you can't do that. We always bring ourselves with us and our struggles and our darkness. And that doesn't mean that we always create unhealthy communities. What I think is a healthy community is the one that goes, yeah, we do. We can't create a new Eden. There isn't this place where, wow, we've left it all behind. We're here together and Let's find a way of working with that, and that is actually the forward momentum. So that's the good news. I kind of felt I had to say, what's the good news? It's not that great, but hey, it's all I got, And because there's a lot of contingencies about happiness that I can't do. Other people can do. There's contingencies about health. If you're healthy, you're probably going to have an easier life than if you're unhealthy, depending on where you live. There's certain contingencies. And I want a world where those are given to more people. I want a world where more people have more opportunities. I want a world economically and politically where people, those contingent things are given are shared, right? But in the midst of that, I also believe that there is this death drive and this darkness that whatever your condition is, you can be to some extent freed from that, less oppressed by it, or in biblical language, you can rob it of its sting. That the lack, the sin meaning lack, the lack within you can be robbed of its sting, no longer oppressing you and destroying you in the midst of all of that. Okay. What time have I got to? Sorry. Oh dear, 3:30? 3:45. Sorry. Okay, I'll try and be entertaining. The balloon animals and stuff like that. I was going to have a sketch pad, and the hilarious thing is they had the sketch pad up all the talks that I didn't need it. And the one talk that I needed, they finally decided he's not using it, so I'm going to take it down. You bring it up, and I'll think about it in the process. Yes, it's like quantum stuff. If you don't bring it, I'll want it. If you do, I won't. Okay, well, it does visually look better, you know. Yeah, so I got two kind of directions. I wonder whether I can do what I was initially wanting to do in this session. That's the only thing I'm thinking of with this notepad, but I think I can. Okay, I'm going to, this next just, 30 minutes, 25 minutes, I'm going to give a little theoretical summary of what I think actually the role of the radical church is, anyway. What's the message and what are we trying to help people with in the church? And I'm going to use a creation myth in order to explain it. I'm always worried when I just need black. Yeah, who would have thought? I'm always worried when I do more theoretical stuff for a simple reason that I didn't start there. We started Icon because we just wanted to create a space where in a place of conflict, a place of violence, a place where, we're talking about violence and conflict and all that. Of course, I'm from Northern Ireland, so I saw how religion was used to create tribal identities. I saw how religion was caught up in political narratives. I saw how religion can be used in destructive ways. But Northern Ireland, for me, is not unique. Northern Ireland is a bit like an extreme version at the time when I was growing up. Like if I was a doctor and I was training you to see cancer, I would show you an extreme form of it to start with, so that you know what it is, so that you can identify less extreme forms. So in some respects, I feel I grew up in an environment where I saw the extremities that would hopefully make it easier for me to identify less extreme, but also problematic forms of violence. So I started off doing Icon, and we played around with different things. And then people, of course, inevitably would say, why are you doing that? So I would make something up, right? I'd make something up. And then I'd go, oh, that sounds quite good. I'll have to remember that, right? So I'd write that down. And then I would pretend that I was doing it because of those reasons. But the reasons were like a later rationalization of the lived experience. And that's how most of us work. But by the way, even in our beliefs, we often start off by growing up, obviously, in a certain religious paradigm and perspective. And then we find reasons, if we continue in that, to believe what we already think. And then we pretend to ourselves and other people that we believe because of the reasons. I've done this when I used to teach in YWAM. You'd say, who believes the Bible is the Word of God or something? And you'd have people all put up their hands as YWAM, and then you'd ask why, and they would give you all these reasons. Oh, the prophecies in the Hebrew Scriptures are fulfilled in the Christian Scriptures, and there's no errors or conflicts, which is like amazing that people think that. Which, by the way, is the very thing that would prove its lack of authenticity. I mean, if someone's had a traumatic event, if someone has been abused, for example, and they go to court, and they can give a very clear summary of what happened, dates and times, that's not evidence they're telling the truth. That would hint that they're actually lying. Whereas if someone gets up and their testimony to the police is slightly different from what they said to their parents, which is slightly different from what they're saying in court, that's not evidence that they're lying. That's evidence that they're saying something true. Because trauma, by definition, is an event that short-circuits the rationality. It's an event that can't be put into a linear frame. It blows up. And so the text itself is talking about a traumatic event. So the idea of God as warrior and peacemaker and all of these conflicting imagery is what you would expect, from trying to explain a traumatic event that transcends discourse. But all of that aside. Oh yes. The YWAMers. Look! I didn't even have to ask you where I was there. I'm trying to get better. Then they would give you all the reasons, but then you choose one of them, you bring them up, and you would chat, and over the space of 5 minutes, you would get them to a place where they're comfortable, and you would ask, is that true? Come on, let's be honest. Is it actually more true that you already believe those things, read your Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and then you're kind of pretending that you believe them because of those reasons, right? Which is the idea, what's called rationalization, what children do when you catch them doing something wrong and they make up an excuse and then they start to believe it themselves, right? So we all kind of do that rationalization. Kierkegaard said, life is lived forwards and understood backwards. We don't know what we're doing. And liberation theology, builds into this. It says, like, you don't get the answer right in abstraction from actually just lived experience. That actually philosophy at its best, it often comes, and Hegel said it like this, like an owl that spreads her wings at dusk, looking at what's taken place. So that's when wisdom comes in after everything's happened and kind of makes sense of it. And so all of that to say, what I'm about to do is, you might hate this, what I'm about to say, but you might still get something valuable out of the practices of transformance art and icon and radical theology. And you might still be able to bring something into your communities that you hear, even if you don't like this frame. This frame is just my attempt to systematize what I'm doing. And the reason why systematization is good is because often churches are a mix of doing stuff that helps people find and live with and bear their lives, and a mix of things that kind of like covers it over. And if you have a frame, you sometimes can just be a little bit better at going, I need to push more into that and less into that. Like, for example, that story I told about the old man and the woman and the child. When you think about it, if you're a pastor and you go, okay, yeah, actually, I'll just be a little bit more careful that although I'm tempted to say to somebody, oh, it's all going to be okay, I'm going to avoid doing that, because that might just give a little bit of false hope. That's great for the moment, but probably not good in their mourning process. And I'm not going to do the opposite of just going, I'm really sorry, you're screwed, right? No, I'm not going to do that either. I'm going to say I'm going to be there. So the frame can just help us become a little bit more sensitive to trying to go a direction that might be healthier. But the creation mythology, loosely of psychoanalysis, is this: is you have the mother. Now, the mother is not always the mother, so that's why some of them put a capital O there. So they're basically the other, and the mother is often the first other. And what that means is the first experience that the infant has of someone else, something outside of its own world, is of the mother, just because the child is on the mother's breast, and then apart and there and apart and there. And so the child experiences the mother, the other. And it's a weird kind of experience, because when the child starts to conceptualize itself as a self, and that happens in the mirror stage, which is a little bit after the birth of the child, that's when the child begins to internalize and have an inner world. As soon as there's an inner world, there's an outer world. As soon as there's a me, there's a you, or there's a not me, right? There's an inside, there has to be an outside. And so the first experience of the child is actually quite traumatic. It's like, oh, I'm separate from my mother, or whoever's standing in for the mother, whoever this other is. And the first thing that needs to happen is something has to come in and make that separation. Language is kind of it, really, the first thing that does it. But there's something comes in that separates you. But it's a strange kind of separation, because you're not really separated from something because you weren't really around. That your birth as a subject, as self, is experienced as a kind of separation. And this is sometimes called, traditionally, again, it's not the father, it's called the name of the father, which has kind of got a religious significance. And in French, the name also sounds like no, the no of the father, something that separates you from your mother. Now, if this doesn't happen, something traumatic occurs, and you become Irish, right? This is why they say Jesus was Irish. The latest research, it's because he lived with his mum till he was 30, and she thought he was God. This is the overconnection with the mother. Honestly, if you've been to Ireland, it's terrible. But this technically, if this doesn't happen weaning is this traumatic process. If this doesn't happen completely, if you don't really separate enough from your mother, psychosis is said to evolve. So psychosis is broadly a range of things that connect with a failure at this first level. So the psychotic is someone who often hears voices, who thinks they are connected with something greater than themselves, is an avatar of something other. There's a whole pile of things that are connected. In other words, they haven't differentiated completely. Their ego hasn't kind of solidified, in a way that they can differentiate. So psychosis, some forms of psychosis result. The second stage is after you have that initial separation, the child wants to get back. That's the first thing you want. You want to get back. I want to find out how can I get all of my mother's desire, all of my family's desire. And often kids are trying to do things that will evoke the desire of their parents, you know. And one of the next traumatic things that happens is you realize you can't have it. Not all of it. Your mother has other desires, other things that interest her, and a life outside of you. And that's very traumatic for the child. Now, if this all kind of like moves forward, what happens is the child eventually accepts that to some extent and finds meaning outside in the world, right? And if that doesn't happen, psychoanalytically, perversion happens. Perversion, in a psychoanalytic meaning of the term, is where you want to be the object of the mother's full desire. So the perverted desire is a desire to be at one with the mother, to fill the mother's lack, to be the instrument of her pleasure. You know, so that's the child. Now, if that child moves on from that, then what they do is they start to desire other people out there, and in a sense, the mother fragments into the world. And so you fancy people who are a little bit like maybe your mother or father or whatever, but not too much, otherwise it seems a bit icky, right? But they have to have something that which kind of evokes your desire. So that's the kind of like process that takes place from psychosis, perversion. Neurosis is the last one. Neurosis is where you're like, this is a bit depressing, right? Can't go back to my mum, but I can kind of get into the world and fancy somebody else and get on with life. And that's neurosis. So you kind of go, well, what's after neurosis? Well, we're all kind of one of those, right? There is no real healthy, where neurosis is the best we've got, although neurosis can be very difficult to deal with. Now, the reason why I'm interested in this frame is because it can help reinterpret the central message of Christianity. We're going to do that in the next 10 minutes. You could say that, what if Christianity and the Jewish Christian tradition is not about trying to get back to God, to reconnect with God? What if actually the subversive message of Christianity is it's actually trying to get you away from God? Right? And so what happens is we have this experience as human beings of this other. Because, by the way, the real flesh and blood mum, is a real person just like us. And at first, you don't really realize that. Your mother is like this God-like figure. And your father as well. I remember the first time I beat my dad at chess, like properly beat him, not like he let me win. Remember the first time I actually beat him at chess. And I remember it was actually really depressing. Because I think it was the first time I realized that he was a human being. I think it's the first time oh my goodness, I actually just beat my dad at chess. And I almost wanted to take it back. Although I was always wanting to beat him, I realized once I'd beaten him, I kind of didn't. It was quite difficult. But that's part of growing up, is you realize your mother and your father are like you and have their issues and their difficulties, right? But at first your mother is the other, this perfect whatever. When you get to this point, you realize as an adult, your mom and dad are just people, and hopefully you have, obviously, like any healthy family, a very traumatic relationship with them, but a normally traumatic relationship with them, where you see them just enough that they annoy you, but not enough that you want to kill them, right? So you got that. In the same sense, we have this idea, maybe when we're born, when we kind of have a sense of identity, a sense of God as what we want to return back to, that will make everything great, that will make everything whole, will give us perfect peace, and that would be amazing. That would be utterly amazing. Now, if you don't have any separation from that, you can have a type of psychotic faith. And a type of psychotic faith is a type of person who thinks, I hear the divine call. I am a divine. I'm an avatar of God. I hear what God's saying. I can stand on the stage and say, "Thus saith the Lord," and I can speak the truth of what God is saying. It's actually hard for me to differentiate my own ego from the divine ego. Now, and I was in a church where there was a psychotic structure. That doesn't mean that people were psychotics in it. I'm talking about the structure was quite psychotic. So we would be talking on behalf of God. We would get up and we would do this. And sometimes it was very funny. You know, somebody got up once and did this things in tongues. And then somebody else got up and gave the interpretation. And then the other person had to sheepishly say, "Well, no, actually, I just said the Lord's Prayer in Arabic," right? It's like, okay, that was a bit embarrassing because the other person got up and said, "This person is saying God is going to do a new thing." And by the way, God's always going to do a new thing in the charismatic church. It's brilliant. Almost every week there was a prophecy about God is going to do a new thing. I went back to the church 20 years later. Don't know why I popped in because I was going past, and someone was giving a prophecy about God bringing new water and doing a new thing. I was like, God's still wanting to do a new thing. I'm waiting for that prophecy where God, this generation, nah, you're not going to do much. But you know what? There's great TV. Like, honestly, there's like TV's in its real heyday. So like, get into Lost. It's very, very good. But now, in terms of the new thing, no, that's for the next bunch. No, it's never that. It's always you guys are going to do the next thing. But so that could be, I would say, a kind of form of psychotic faith. Now, the way I read the covenants, you've got these covenants. People think that the reason for the covenants were to bring you close to God. The reason why there are covenants in the Bible are to unify you with the divine. But actually, covenants work in exactly the opposite way, right? A covenant or a contract is designed to separate you from the desire of the person you're in contract with, right? So if you have a divorce, for example, the reason why you go to court and get a contract is because you do not want to be a slave to the other person's desire. They go, "I don't want you to see the kids this week, so you're not going to see them." You go, "Well, listen, you have to let me see them." "Oh, I don't want to pay alimony." You have to pay, right? Even in business, you have a contract with somebody because you want to be protected from their desire. You want distance from their desire. This is exactly what you get in this creation mythology, where the first step is the child has to be separated from the mother's desire. The mother's desire is too oppressive. So the first step is you have to be separated so that you can start to live. So within the Jewish tradition, God's crazy. God's like smashing things, blowing things up, flooding the world. It's like apocalypse. It's watching Mad Max, right? And so the first thing you need is a contract, which allows you to get on with life, right? Live your life, knowing that, hold on, as long as we do our side and you do your side, we can get on with just living. And within Judaism, you see this in a very healthy way, where if someone's mother's son is marrying somebody, she doesn't ask, "Do you believe in God?" No. Are you part of the tradition? Are you part of this thing? It's like you're part of it. That God's doing God's thing. In fact, there's so many stories in Judaism, and I won't go into them because we don't have time, but that basically say, clear off, God, let us do our own thing here. You had your say. I mean, you wrote a whole bloody book for us. Now you've said your piece, let us kind of live. And that's a very Jewish kind of notion, is that we need a little bit of separation from God, right? Now, interestingly, that also exists within Christianity, I think in a much more unhealthy way. Christian mysticism, which I've been very influenced by, particularly Meister Eckhart, but I'm also a little bit critical of, because Christian mysticism seems to sometimes have a perverse structure to me. Whereas Jewish mysticism is, you cannot speak of God, therefore let's kind of get on with life. In Christian mysticism, there's this thing of we cannot speak of God, therefore all we're going to do is continually speak of how we cannot speak of God, right? So they just continually are obsessed by how you can't talk about God. Now, in the same way, the perverse subject is the one who is separated from the mother and the mother's desire, but they're still obsessed. They're always trying to go back. They know they can't. They're separated, but they're always wanting to be the object of the other's full satisfaction. So they're still obsessed with the backward return. And in some forms of Christian mysticism, I think you can see this strange structure. If we cannot speak of God, we're separated, but we're still obsessed somehow with that shadow. That's still something that we're pulling back to. But I think that's a bit of progress. But the second stage is where you realize that this mother other, right, doesn't exist. That's the neurotic. Is this what I'm trying to get? It's not there. There's only just a real flesh and blood mum, and I have to go out and I have to live my life and learn how to, be a human being in the world, right? That's the last stage. In this, I would say, and this is where Christianity comes in, the scandal of Christianity is this last move to neurosis, to theological neurosis, which is, and in order to explain this, I'll just do this. This is what comes up to my book, The Divine Magician. You have in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve are in the garden, and you've got this tree, and it's a prohibition. You can't eat of the tree. So very similar structure to this, right? And what makes the fruit so magical? Well, you could argue it's the prohibition. As soon as you say to a kid, you can't have that, what's in that box? What's in the box? I really want in the box. It becomes magical. You say to a child, oh, you can't have that toy. Very soon they're going, that's the only thing I ever want in my life is that toy. That toy will satisfy me completely. You don't have to buy me anything else for Christmas or ever. I will be so happy when you get me the puppy. When you get me the puppy, I'll be so happy. And we all know that 2 weeks later, the kid doesn't care about the puppy and you have to drown it in the bath, right? It's the very holding back which creates this desire. And as I said, this holding back creates the death drive. The more this thing, the idealization, the more the thing you think will make you happy you can't get, the more you're driven to it and the more problematic it gets. So in Adam and Eve, you have this kind of structure. This is also, interestingly, how the temple is set up. You have the court of Gentiles, you have the Holy of Holies, and you have this massive curtain that's down the middle. This is also, by the way, what a magic trick looks like, a vanishing act. A vanishing act, you've got the magician. The vanishing act got 3 parts. It's got the pledge, the object that you're going to make disappear, this coin, this rabbit, You've got the turn, which is the disappearance. You put it behind a curtain. You rip the curtain back and it's gone. Whoa, where's it gone, right? And then the third act. You always need a third act. People are always waiting for the return. You pick up something and there it is, the rabbit sitting there. Right? Now, the truth is in vanishing acts, you actually never get back what you lost. I have a coin trick I'll show you at some stage, but basically, you think you're getting back the coin that I made disappear. You're not. It's a coin that I planted 5 minutes ago. The other coin's down my back, right? But you think you're getting back the same. It's like, Shizak says about the bird in the magic trick, which is very true. The bird you get back, and it's in the film The Prestige, the bird you get back isn't the bird that disappeared. That bird's dead, right? The magician broke its neck and stuffed it up as sleeve, right? The magicians have a lot of dead birds in the back, right? But we, of course, think we're getting the same bird back. So if you think of Christianity as a type of magic trick, where you have the sacred object, the thing that you think will make you whole and complete, the mother, God, whatever, that's the pledge. This is what will make you whole and complete. And then it's put behind a curtain, right? Then the turn. The turn is the ripping away of the curtain. And in Christianity, you have this. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then the temple curtain rips. Ta-da! And you see inside the Holy of Holies, and there's nothing there. It's empty. It's like the Roman general who, I can't remember in what year, but he went behind the temple curtain in Jerusalem, and he comes out and says, the sanctuary's empty, there's nothing there. Or the cosmonaut who went into space and said, God's not there. That's the Christian insight par excellence. The temple curtain rips. The traumatic insight, the thing that we think will make us whole and complete, doesn't exist. Bam! Oh my goodness. But the trick doesn't end there. The trick always has to have the prestige. So what's the prestige of Christianity? And Andy's going to like this because for the first time I'm going to use the word resurrection. Death. Is the return of what disappeared. But the return is always the return of something slightly different. So in the trick of Christianity, I would say that what disappears is the sacred object. The sacred object is the object that you think will make you whole and complete. Bam, disappears. Boom. What do you get back? You get back the sacred, not as an object, but as the depth dimension in all objects. So it's a very subtle difference, but it's an incredibly important difference. What you get back is the idea that because the sacred object is always just out of reach. You can never grasp it. And every time you think you've grasped it, you're holding nothing. The sacred as the depth dimension in objects is the idea that you experience a depth dimension in your life, not in what you could have, but in what you do have, in giving yourself to a cause, in giving yourself to another person, in giving yourself to your family, in giving yourself to a project, that you find meaning in that, even though it's imperfect, even though it's problematic. That's what love is. Love is, and that's the difference between sublimation and idealization. In sublimation, something fragile, broken, and beautiful is rendered perfect. Not but it's in its imperfections. We love something not despite its imperfections. We're not closing our eyes to the imperfections, but we love the person because of their imperfections, because knowing that they're fully human, we sublimate them, we see something wonderful going on there. Whereas idealization closes your eyes to imperfections, says, oh, it's going to be perfect, and that's why you're always disappointed. In real love, you embrace the other in their otherness and in their brokenness, and you find meaning. And this is what I think faith is. Faith is like love. If you believe that the world is meaningful, you have a theology or a philosophy that tells you that you will lie down in green pastures, right? But you do not love, you cannot help but experience the world as meaningless. Can't help it. Doesn't matter how much you believe it's meaningful. Without a life of love, life is experienced as vacuous. And in contrast, if you believe the world is meaningless and everything will go to ultimately a cold death or a big crunch, and everything that has ever been will disappear, and everyone you love will disappear, and life will be swallowed up in death, but you love, you cannot help but experience the world as meaningful. You can't help it. Food becomes communion. You know, a walk with someone you love becomes a way of, immersing yourself in the beauty of nature. You know, life becomes ritualistic. And it's not that you can help it, it's not that you choose it. Faith is not the intellectual belief that life is meaningful. Faith is the intellectual, or is the existential protest against meaninglessness. It is the full-bodied commitment to the meaningfulness of life, despite what you think, despite what you believe, because life has a depth dimension and a sacredness. And this is, I think, talked about in the biblical text when God is known post-crucifixion as where two or three are gathered together, where the hungry are fed, and the thirsty are given water, where the people in prison are visited and set free, where real material change happens. That's where God is. You know, Dietrich Bonhoeffer's, to live as though God is not given as this is to live fully before God and with God, where God is fragmented into the world, just as I said that the mother, in a sense, is fragmented into the world and helps us then desire in the world. So God is immanent in the world, allowing us to fully embrace it. And actually, the Eucharist can be understood as the inaction of this. Every time you take it, it's the three-part vanishing act. Do you know that the early magicians used to say hocus pocus at the key point in the magic trick when something was transformed, and that they likely took it from the priests during Mass who would say hoc est corpus whenever the bread and the wine was turned into the body and blood of Christ? In fact, it goes further than that. They use the term pater, which probably comes from paternoster. You know, the pater of the magician that lulls you into a little bit of a trance so they can do the trick, right? Now, of course, this was condemned. There was an Archbishop Tillotson who said, oh, you know, they're making a mockery of the Eucharist. They're saying it's a magic trick. And actually, Tillotson was like, yeah, and they're right. Like, the Catholic Church kind of does this type of magic trick, and he was condemning that as well. He said, the Eucharist isn't a magic trick. But what if the magicians were right? What if they were onto something? What if the Eucharist and Christianity more generally is a type of vanishing trick with three parts? You have the bread and the wine. Here's God. Here's the sacred in flesh. That's the pledge. Then you have the turn, which is the disappearance in the body. And then you're waiting for the prestige. When's the prestige? And you realize that we are the prestige. The sacred is in our flesh and blood, in our lives, in our ability to reach out to one another, to be in community, and to engage in the hard work of world transformation. This is Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa, who when she was young gave everything. And then in her 30s, she had the call within the call where she lost everything, including her sense of God's presence. Lost it all. Lost it all. She felt this void. And at the end of her life, she wanted all of her journals burned. Why? Because there was a secret in there? Was she having an affair with the Pope? Right? Did she have a world's biggest collection of Ferraris? No. That's what people... Was it because she was scared that people would know she was doubting? That inside she felt that God was absent from her for most of her adult life? No. She's very clear. She basically says, people will think that the truth of Christianity, the truth of God, is in your internal life. No. It's in the orphanages that have been built. It's in the children that are being cared for. It's in the people whose lives are being restored. Don't look into my inner life to find God. I find God in the world. That's all I got. I know, you don't know whether to clap or not. Through graffiti. I don't know if I feel like we should just, maybe we should have a question, I don't know, or maybe we shouldn't. Okay, well, there's somebody put their hand up, so that's an answer. We'll have at least a couple of questions. There's a mic coming to you.
Can you, in those icon services, do you need the language of the Bible and the language of the church? Do you need the word of God and the word God?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it what I think is an insufficient answer to that question, and then I might get a better one later on. And the insufficient answer is I'm going to use a guy called Vadimo. Vadimo says, you like Vadimo? Yeah. Vadimo's a good guy, but he asks, people say, are you a Christian? And he says, I cannot not be a Christian. He says, in a sense, I've been nurtured on these words, on this tradition. And he says, basically, if you're in the West, today, he says, you cannot not be a Christian. You've been immersed in this text, in this tradition. And he sees secularism as a part of Christianity and an outworking of that. And so before I can say anything, and Heidegger said the same, he said, we're thrown into a situation and we're projecting ourselves out of it. And the place where I was thrown in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, was very much immersed in the biblical texts, very much immersed in that, in religion and whatever. But what I was given in those texts was something that I found ultimately subversive. There was a core that was transformative. And we use those texts, not even use them, that's the wrong word. We are used by them. They are part of us. And so even the parables I write, you see them immersed in that tradition. So in some really subjective sense, I'm saying, yeah, we are immersed in that. Now, we also use, so you heard I used an Islamic parable, I used a Buddhist parable, I used other traditions, but primarily I came to this through Christianity, and even the philosophies that I'm most influenced by, so psychoanalysis, comes out of a very Jewish tradition. And existentialism, which comes out of primarily an incredibly Christian position. So you can partly see them as people say, oh, you're trying to put existentialism or psychoanalysis into the Bible. But in one sense, I want to say, well, no, to be honest, really, they kind of came out of it. And I want to kind of show that we can't give all our treasures away. I mean, it's good, let's give the treasure away, but it's not a zero-sum game. Those treasures are still there. And these people can now help us reflect on the scriptures that we've got. So that's the inadequate answer, because the other part of it is I do have critiques of other philosophical systems and whatever, and I do sometimes have a very strong identification with this form of Christianity. But I don't do that from some sense of objectively standing with the truth. I do that as being within this tradition and finding incredible wealth within it. And if I hadn't found that wealth, I probably would have moved on. So I don't know if that's of any use. Yeah. Maybe one more.
So what would be the difference between what you're suggesting, kind of finding God in other people and in the lives we live, and a kind of humanism, like just taking God out of that and just finding meaning in other people, but not God necessarily? What would the difference be that you're...
Absolutely. It's interesting. Like, for me, the word God undergoes changes. The word God is as slippery as other terms. No, not like incredibly slippery. God will mean very kind of strong and stable, have a strong and stable meaning for a long period of time. But the term God does change and develop. And I think that's going to obviously continue to happen, and that is happening now. And I think that term is still has value and use. I mean, Christians have often, like Paul Tillich was a theologian who said atheism is closer, a form of atheism is closer to God than theism. You go, what does he mean? Well, he said, well, if you reject God because of the wars that have been fought in God's name, because of the violence that has been done in the name of God and by the church, then you are affirming the sanctity of life. You're affirming that life is worth fighting for, that life is meaningful. And therefore, he says, you are in conformity with the prophets. And therefore, in a sense, you're affirming the God of the prophets. So he would often talk about the God beyond God. Meister Eckhart talked about the Godhead. Jean-Luc Marion, a great conservative Catholic mystic, very smart guy, but he writes God with a St. Andrew's cross through the O, so it's like crossed out. Meister Eckhart says, I pray God rid me of God. So I would say that the Christian's idea of God is always under erasure. Even in the Lord's Prayer, you say, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So you name God as Father, and then you immediately say the name is hallowed, which means holy, which means set apart, different from what we mean. So not Father like we think of Father, you know. It's immediately nominated and denominated. I like actually that churches are called denominations, to denominate, to dename. You know, you name and you dename. That's an aside. But the question is then humanism, and what's the difference? Well, I see humanism as actually coming out of the Christian tradition as well. But there is no. I'm working within Christianity, and I think that I use that language and that discourse in order to do what I'm doing. And I've got it. Scrap that, pretend I didn't say that. If I was a hypnotist, I'd be like, forget that I hesitated there. So very quickly, this is not about atheism or theism. For me, the next evolution of church is beyond theism and atheism. In a sense, I think the church will always be primarily theistic, probably 70% for a foreseeable future. But this notion of God it's not about bringing people to atheism, which is kind of what humanism does, is that there is no God. I'm only critiquing a certain notion of God as idle, as an object that will satisfy and complete. You can still be a theist with this position. You can also not be a theist, but that's a very fundamental difference with humanism, and that's why some people critique me, but I'm going like, it's only a form of theism, and I can tell whether your God is an idol. Like, one of the hints would be this. If I'm talking to you and say I don't believe and you do believe, and you start foaming at the mouth because I'm questioning your God, I would be going, that God's acting as an idol. It's covering over something. If, however, we're talking and you're like, yeah, I believe in God and let's have a good old debate about it, but you're not defensive, you find the discussion really enriching, I'm going like, well, that God, that theism is not this idolatrous type. What's called in analysis the big other. The big other is the idol. So the difference in humanism is I'm not saying that this is atheistic or theistic. This is neither, in a sense. This is something else. This is about the destruction of a form of sovereignty, a form of sovereign God, a form of idolatry, which functions in a variety of ways. And so it's not anti-theism. It's just anti the big other. Oh, I'm so glad I remembered to say that. Thank you.